Let's jump over to the Big Ten. We have a fun one today for Tom. Ohio State. We did Penn State last week, so if you missed that, go back and watch it. We'll link it at the end of the video. But Ohio State still maybe the favorites in the Big Ten. Has that officially come out? Is Ohio State the favorite?
Well, according to the coaches poll, they're second. So how much of stock you put in that? I mean, a lot of sports books that you look at, it'll be Ohio State 1, Penn State 2, Oregon 3 to win the Big Ten championship game itself this year. And that's just depends on where you look. So I think Ohio State is getting plenty of love considering they won the national championship last year. Let's start at quarterback. It's not nearly the stability that Ohio State fans have enjoyed for many, many years now. Will Howard did an excellent job last year, but there is a legitimate battle happening in camp right now between Julian Sayin and Lincoln Kienholz. Kienholz has been pushing Sayin. Sayin has never truly been a starter in major college football, was recruited to Alabama, quickly transferred to Ohio State, sat last year behind Will Howard. Lincoln Kienholz, many people remember, played that bowl game a few years ago against Mizzou, and it was dreadful, but he was so green. So this is a very different situation. For me, looking across the board at Ohio State, Ryan Day brings stability, but you have big questions when it comes to your coordinator positions. Not that these are untalented coaches by any means, but you have Brian Hartline, arguably the greatest wide receiver coach in college football, moving to be the offensive coordinator now that Chip Kelly has gone back to the NFL. Defensively, Jim Knowles departs for Penn State. We talked about last week. Jim Knowles helps you win a national championship. You don't necessarily treat him all that well, apparently. And now you have Matt Patricia, formerly an NFL guy. So it kind of feels eerily similar to what Chip Kelly was. Come in, play a year, work a year, and then depart, something like that. So I'm curious to see where that goes for both those coordinator spots, because I think there's a lot of reason for optimism for Ohio State fans for them to potentially get back into the college football playoff and potentially win the Big Ten championship and credibly contend for the national championship. It begins with quarterback, as I just mentioned. Wide receiver, I'm expecting Jeremiah Smith to break every single season receiving record this upcoming year because Brian Hartline's the offensive coordinator. And it was a huge mistake they made against Michigan last year, deciding we're a run-first team and we're going to be a physical football team. No.
They still pass, though. That's the only thing.
They still pass, though, but I think they're going to lean more into that, and especially you don't have Judkins. You don't have Henderson at tailback. You have some young talent there, and you got to see how it develops, but C.J. Donaldson transferring in from West Virginia, Bo Jackson, Peoples, Sam Dixon as well, Sam Williams Dixon, excuse me. There's talent there. I just don't think it's going to be the same level of pop and explosion that you saw last year from Henderson and Judkins because they gave you the explosive play. I think all the people, myself included, who questioned what Ohio State's offensive line talent was like last year need to shut up until they see something really glaring, because Ohio State showed that even if they're doing a quote-unquote patchwork offensive line, when you pile up 5 stars and 4 stars and they eventually get on the field, they look like 5 stars and 4 stars. And Ohio State's returning a fair amount of guys from last year along that offensive line, and they just have talent, if not experience. They certainly have talent there along the offensive line. Defensively, this is going to be a little bit more of a question because you've sent a good amount of leadership off to the National Football League. I don't have to remind people how important Jack Sawyer was to this team last year. Bo Atkinson, the transfer from UNC, moving in as a defensive end. Kenyatta, Jackson, McDonald, Houston. Those are guys along the defensive line that are familiar to Ohio State fans. There should be good production there, but I think this is maybe going to be eerily similar to the way that Penn State's defensive depth kind of looks like going into 2025. Really good-looking secondary for Ohio State, led by Caleb Downs, Jalen McClain, Igbinosun, Styles Jr. Like, there's a lot of guys here that are going to be able to contribute and have played with a lot of experience. You feel fantastic about the linebacker position with Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese. So I think there's going to be a lot of instances where it may not result in sacks and pressures, kind of like what I talked about last week with Penn State's defense and their pieces, but you're going to have a really nice secondary. And I think that's going to play into what they want to do this year. It just depends on what Matt Patricia ultimately does with this defense. How does it look with him going into this first season for him with a major college football team? Starting off against Texas, best of luck there. That is a really challenging game. At least you get it at home. Then it's Grambling and Ohio, basically 2 bye weeks. You're at Washington, at home against Minnesota, at Illinois. We were just talking about the top 15 in college football. People should not be looking past Illinois and Brett Bielema. Illinois showed to a reasonable extent that they could have been considered for that last spot in the college football playoff last year, I believe. You'll see Ohio State at Wisconsin. You'll see them host Penn State. That's going to be a challenging game. Jim Knowles coming back to Ohio State with something to prove. That's scary for Ohio State fans. You're at Purdue. You play against UCLA and Rutgers back-to-back games at home, and then you end the season against Michigan, who you've not beaten in a while, and that is always something that is polarizing for the fan base. So I think Ohio State is set up for success in 2025. Will they win the national championship again? I'm not entirely sure, and I do think there's going to be more pressure on whomever that quarterback is, whether it's Sand or Keinholz, to not necessarily be Superman, but you're going to have to do a little bit more, and that you're not going to have what you had from the running game last season. I love this receiving core, whether it's wide receiver or tight end, and how can you not? Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Brandon Inniss is your top three guys at receiver. Max Clare, I have been singing his praises for a while, the transfer tight end from Purdue. That Purdue offense was rough to watch, but as long as they put it into Claire's hands, good things happen on a regular basis. So for whomever that quarterback is, to have four very reliable receiving threats and time to throw the ball, that's going to be scary for other teams.
Their floor feels about like 9-3, and
Yeah.
and that would be a disappointment. A good place for fans to be in when your worst case scenario is probably still right on the edge of the playoff, if not in. I try not to think too much about like what the results of the first game will mean. As much hype as there is around a possible 1-2 matchup, I don't really think it matters.
It's not. It doesn't.
Whereas like you look at like the LSU Clemson game, and that one feels maybe more consequential for both teams that are probably going to be fighting to get in, although Clemson certainly an easier road. But you talk about the Penn State game, the Illinois game, Washington, and then Michigan being the big one. Can they get that monkey off their back? And I think we'll know so much more about Michigan at that point. We'll know so much more about Ohio State at that point. But that's still one of the top three games of the year to me, right? It's so hard to project what both teams will look like. We've been doing the countdown daily on the channel, and that Michigan one to me is still the one that sticks out as to what'll make or break their year. Certainly it didn't last year, but one that is the most intriguing to me on the schedule.
It's intriguing, and again, we've said it for a while on this show. What is Bryce Underwood in year one? Is he the starter super early? Is he looking like Cam Newton, like people think he's going to look like? That could completely change the complexion of that game. What are Michigan's fates this upcoming year? I think that's a huge storyline for college football, and I don't think they go exactly the way Underwood goes, but still, if they're in the running for the college football playoff, same with Ohio State, when you get to that game at the end of the year, that makes it even more compelling, regardless of what they're ranked. I really don't care at that point. But I think Ohio State is naturally getting some love because of the brand, because they just won the national championship. They returned some excellent pieces, but I do think those coordinator changes are going to be significant, and it's going to take them a minute to really understand who they are. And it's going to be mid-October, early November until they really grasp that. And Penn State is, outside of the Texas game, their biggest test at that point of the year when they really have an identity.
Tom, what do you think is more detrimental for Ohio State this year? They go 11-1, but the loss is to Michigan, or they go 10-2, and they beat Texas, they beat Michigan, they lose to Penn State, and then they drop a random game to say like Washington. Which would be more promising for the fan base that they could stomach?
I mean, as long as you beat Michigan and you're an Ohio State fan, you're going to rest easy. And I see there's a lot of Ohio State, Michigan comments here in the chat. So, I mean, as long as you get past Michigan, you're going to be fine. I'm really interested in what happens with this Texas game at the beginning of the season. This is the points you and TJ were just hitting, is like, hey, how much is this held against either team or propped up for the winner by the time we get to November? Is it just kind of like, hey, by the way, don't forget, this game happened a million years ago, that sort of thing? I think it might go that way. I think if Ohio State were to beat Michigan, but for instance, lose to Penn State, the Washington loss, because I don't think people are expecting that, even though I know you and I think the world of Damon Williams, a quarterback for the Huskies, man, that is kind of an X factor there going on the road. And maybe that is a trap game, something like that. If you're able to beat Texas, you're off to a great start, regardless of who's at quarterback. The quarterback could have a horrible game, and as long as you get past that, you're like, woo, okay, we're going somewhere, but we're a little shaky here. Trap game potentially with Washington. I don't know, man. Like, I feel like a good season, a great season for this team is 10-2, and that's losing potentially to Penn State and Texas. I still expect them to beat Michigan this upcoming year, even though their recent track record has not been in that favor. But still, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to repeat. I think it's reasonable to expect them to get back to the playoff. And that's where a trap game against Washington, potential losses, 50-50 games, let's call them that, against Texas, Penn State, and Michigan. 4 games on your schedule. When you get into that territory with this 12-team playoff, you're making it easier for them to say, hey, we love the brand, but your record isn't reinforcing you getting into the playoff.
I mean, 9-3 last year kept Alabama out, and they had
Exactly.
2 terrible losses. That was a big deal. And I'll say this real fast. If Texas was to play this game against Ohio State and say week 6 in Columbus, I think Ohio State. I think it's the fact that it's week 1 and so many new pieces are being broken into.